The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. Every head in the ballroom turned, and that's when Lucas Reyes realized his life was about to change forever. The Grandview Hotel ballroom sparkled like a diamond mine that Tuesday night in October. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's houses cast rainbows across polished marble floors. The kind of floors that probably cost more per square foot than Lucas Reyes made in a month. But Lucas wasn't thinking about money as he adjusted his black vest and checked his reflection in the service hallway mirror. He was thinking about survival. About the electric bill that was due tomorrow. About the rent on his tiny clinic that kept him up at night. About the 17-year-old kid, Miguel, who'd be sleeping on the streets again if Lucas couldn't help him navigate the foster system by Friday. "You ready, Lucas?" Janet Martinez, the catering manager, appeared beside him with a clipboard thick enough to choke a horse. At 52, she'd seen every kind of rich person drama the city had to offer. "This crowd's gonna be interesting tonight." Lucas straightened his name tag, the little plastic rectangle that might as well have been a target painted on his chest. "Lucas Reyes, catering staff." "Define interesting," he said, though he already knew. He'd worked enough of these galas to recognize the type. Old money, new money, and people pretending they had money. All gathered to pat themselves on the back for their charitable giving, while eating appetizers that cost more than minimum wage workers made in a day. Metro City Foundation's annual gala, Janet explained, flipping through her clipboard. "Mayor's wife is here. Hospital board. 3 news crews. And..." She lowered her voice. "The Ashworths." Lucas raised an eyebrow. Everyone in the city knew that name. Ashworth Development had built half the skyscrapers downtown. They owned shopping centers, apartment complexes, and probably a small country somewhere. "Victoria Ashworth specifically," Janet continued. Let's just say she has opinions about service staff. Strong opinions. "Keep your head down around table 7. Lucas nodded, but something twisted in his stomach. He'd learned to navigate difficult people. It came with the territory when you grew up bouncing between foster homes. But there was something about the way Janet said it that set off alarm bells. "All right, team." Janet clapped her hands, gathering the dozen other servers around them. "Remember, we're invisible tonight until we're needed. Smile, say, 'Yes sir,' and 'Yes ma'am,' and don't take anything personally. These people live in a different world than us." If only they knew, Lucas thought as he picked up his first tray of champagne glasses. If only they knew I live in 3 different worlds at once. The ballroom doors opened, and Lucas stepped into a scene that looked like it had been pulled from a movie about the wealthy elite. Women in gowns that probably cost more than his car glided across the floor like they were floating. Men in custom tuxedos stood in clusters, discussing things like market volatility and the situation in the Hamptons. The air smelled like expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and money. Lots and lots of money. Lucas began his circuit, offering champagne with the practiced smile he'd perfected over 3 years of catering gigs. Most people took glasses without even looking at him. A few said, "Thank you," in that absent-minded way you thank an elevator for working. But it was fine. More than fine, actually. Because every ignored "thank you," every dismissive wave, every moment of being treated like part of the furniture was funding something bigger. At 27, Lucas had learned to compartmentalize his life into neat little boxes. Box 1, Lucas the law school graduate, Harvard class of 2023, summa cum laude, law review. Box 2, Lucas the clinic founder, who'd opened Eastside Legal Aid 6 months ago in a converted storefront between a laundromat and a taco shop. Box 3, Lucas the invisible server, who funded boxes 1 and 2 by carrying trays and cleaning up after people who would cross the street to avoid him in his regular clothes. Tonight, only box 3 mattered. Tonight, he was just the help. "Excuse me," he said softly to a group of women admiring the silent auction items. They were bidding on a weekend in Napa Valley, starting bid $1,500. More than Lucas had spent on groceries in the past 6 months. They didn't acknowledge him as he collected their empty glasses. One woman actually turned her back to him mid-conversation, as if his presence might contaminate her story about her daughter's equestrian lessons. Invisible, he reminded himself as he moved to the next cluster of guests. You're invisible, and that's exactly how you want it. But Lucas had never been good at staying invisible for long. The first sign of trouble came at table 12, where a group of older men were discussing the homeless problem downtown. Lucas was clearing their appetizer plates when one of them, silver-haired, probably 70, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and private beaches, gestured dismissively toward the windows. The whole East Side district is becoming an eyesore, the man was saying. All these bleeding hearts opening community centers and legal clinics just encourage them to stay. What they need is to be moved along. Lucas's hand tightened on the plate he was holding. The legal clinic the man was complaining about was probably his. The one he'd scraped together with student loans, savings from catering jobs, and help from his law school mentor, Professor Chen, who'd co-signed the lease when no one else would take a chance on a 26-year-old with more dreams than collateral. Absolutely right, Charles, another man agreed. I heard there's some do-gooder lawyer down there now, probably fresh out of school, thinks he's going to save the world. Give it 6 months before reality sets in. 6 months. That's exactly how long the clinic had been open. Lucas set down the last plate carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. These young lawyers, Charles continued, taking a sip of his wine, they all want to play savior until they realize there's no money in it. Mark my words, that clinic will be closed by Christmas. Lucas straightened up, tray balanced perfectly in his hands. For just a moment, he considered saying something. Considered telling them about Maria Santos, the single mother he'd helped keep her apartment when her landlord tried to illegally triple her rent. About David Kim, the teenager he'd gotten into community college after everyone else told him he'd never make it. About the 12 families he'd helped navigate immigration paperwork that might have otherwise been separated. Instead, he smiled his invisible smile and said, "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" They barely glanced at him. "We're fine," Charles waved him away. As Lucas walked back toward the kitchen, he heard Charles's voice carry, "It's always the same type, you know. Bleeding heart liberals who think they can fix everything with good intentions and other people's money." Other people's money. Lucas almost laughed. If only they knew that every dollar keeping that clinic open came from nights exactly like this one. From standing on aching feet for 8 hours, from being ignored and dismissed and treated like furniture with legs. The kitchen was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Chefs calling out orders, servers rushing in and out with trays, the constant clatter of dishes and silverware. Lucas took a moment to center himself, the way Professor Chen had taught him before difficult court appearances. "You look like you need coffee," said Maria, not the Maria from his clinic, but Maria Gonzalez, one of the other servers. She'd been working catering gigs for 15 years, had 3 kids, and somehow always managed to maintain her sense of humor despite dealing with entitled rich people every weekend. "That obvious?" Lucas asked, gratefully accepting the cup she offered. "Honey, I've seen that look before," Maria laughed. "Someone out there get under your skin?" "Just the usual," Lucas said, though it wasn't entirely true. Something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was being so close to people discussing his life's work like it was a naive experiment. Maybe it was the stress of tomorrow's bills, or maybe it was the fact that in 3 hours, everything was going to change, and he was the only one who knew it. "Well, shake it off," Maria advised, adjusting her own name tag. "We've got a long night ahead, and Janet said they're doing some big award ceremony later. Lots of speeches, lots of standing ovations, lots of refilling wine glasses during emotional moments." Award ceremony. Lucas's stomach did a small flip. He'd managed to push it to the back of his mind, but it was happening. Tonight. In this room. In front of these people. "You okay?" Maria asked, noticing his expression. "Yeah," Lucas said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about tomorrow. If only she knew that tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be invisible anymore. Tomorrow, the whole city would know his name. But first, he had to get through tonight." Lucas returned to the ballroom with a fresh tray of champagne, weaving through conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. The room was filling up as more guests arrived for the main event. He recognized faces from the newspaper society pages, people whose charity galas and fundraising efforts were covered like sporting events. Near the back of the room, he spotted 3 teenagers in servers' uniforms who looked like they were working their first fancy event. They kept glancing around with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding them. Lucas remembered that feeling, the first time he'd worked an event like this, when he was 22 and still processing the culture shock of moving from foster care to Harvard. He made his way over to them during a lull in service. "First time?" he asked the youngest-looking one, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19. "That obvious?" The kid, his name tag read Tommy, replied nervously. "This place is insane. That lady over there just spent $3,000 on a golf lesson with some pro I've never heard of." "It gets easier," Lucas assured him. "Just remember, they're people like anyone else. They just have more money to spend on things they don't need. Tommy laughed. My mom would lose her mind if she could see this place. She works 3 jobs just to keep our apartment. Something in Lucas's chest tightened. How many times had he had that exact thought growing up? How many foster families had he lived with who struggled to put food on the table while places like this existed just across town? What are you studying? Lucas asked. Pre-med at State, Tommy said proudly. Gonna be a doctor someday. Work in the ER, help people who can't afford to go anywhere else. There it is, Lucas thought. The hope. The dream that keeps you going through nights like this. That's good, Lucas said. Hold on to that. Don't let nights like this make you cynical. The world needs doctors who remember what it's like to struggle. Tommy nodded seriously. What about you? You've been doing this long. Lucas paused. How did you explain that you were simultaneously everything and nothing in this room? That you were working toward a law degree while serving drinks to people who would never see you as an equal? That you were funding a legal clinic by being invisible to the very people who complained about do-gooders trying to help the community? Long enough, he said finally. But not forever. Before Tommy could ask what he meant, Janet's voice crackled through their earpieces. All staff, VIP section needs attention. Table 7 specifically. And remember, extra special service for our top-tier donors. Lucas's stomach dropped. Table 7. The Ashworths. He made his way across the ballroom, dodging conversations about real estate investments and charitable tax deductions. The VIP section was roped off with velvet, because apparently even at charity events, there had to be levels of exclusivity. Table 7 sat in the center of the VIP section like a throne. And holding court at that throne was Victoria Ashworth. She was exactly what Lucas had expected and somehow worse. Maybe 50 years old, with the kind of blonde hair that required weekly maintenance and cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her red dress probably had a designer name that Lucas couldn't pronounce, and her jewelry caught the light like tiny spotlights announcing her wealth to anyone who might have missed it. But it was her laugh that set Lucas on edge. Sharp. Cutting. The kind of laugh that happened when someone thought they were funnier than they actually were. And then I told the decorator, darling, if you think I'm paying $50,000 for curtains that don't even match my sofa, you clearly don't understand the Ashworth aesthetic, she was saying to her table of admirers. The group laughed like she'd just delivered the punchline of the century. Lucas approached from the side, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. In his experience, people like Victoria Ashworth viewed sudden movements from service staff as either incompetence or aggression. He reached for an empty champagne flute near her left elbow, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. Course, the poor dear didn't understand that taste can't be bought. It has to be inherited, Victoria continued, gesturing dramatically. Lucas's hand closed around the glass. Hey, the word hit him like a physical blow. Sharp. Commanding. Designed to stop him in his tracks. Every conversation at the table died instantly. Lucas looked up to find Victoria's ice blue eyes locked on his face with an expression of pure displeasure. This is the VIP section, she announced, her voice carrying to neighboring tables. Guests only. The champagne glass felt fragile in Lucas's hand. Around the table, he could see the other guests' faces, some embarrassed, some curious, some clearly enjoying the drama that was about to unfold. I'm just clearing glasses, ma'am, Lucas said, keeping his voice steady and professional. The same tone he used in court when opposing counsel was being difficult. Victoria rolled her eyes with theatrical exaggeration, as if Lucas had just claimed the earth was flat. You're a waiter. Not a guest. Don't hover around here like you belong. The words landed like slaps. Each one carefully chosen for maximum impact. Lucas felt heat rising in his face, the familiar burn of humiliation that he remembered from childhood, from being the foster kid who didn't have the right clothes, the right background, the right anything. Go clean a table somewhere else, Victoria added, waving him away like he was an annoying insect. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas was aware of every eye in the VIP section watching him, waiting to see how the help would respond to being put in his place. At a table behind him, someone whispered, "Yikes," but nobody said anything in his defense. Of course, Lucas managed, his voice steady despite the storm building in his chest. Sorry for the inconvenience. He picked up the empty glass and stepped back, feeling the weight of their stares like spotlights. As he turned to walk away, he caught fragments of the conversation resuming at table 7. Honestly, can you believe the help these days? No sense of boundaries or proper behavior. Probably doesn't even speak English properly. That last comment stopped Lucas in his tracks. He turned back slightly, just enough to see who had said it, a thin man in his 60s with the kind of mustache that belonged in an old movie about railroad barons. Probably doesn't even speak English properly. Lucas spoke 3 languages fluently. He'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. He'd argued cases before judges who respected his legal arguments. He'd given presentations to professors who praised his analytical thinking. But to these people, he was just brown skin in a server's vest. The walk back to the service area felt like it lasted forever. Lucas was hyper-aware of every conversation he passed, wondering if other guests had witnessed his humiliation, if word was spreading through the ballroom about the waiter who'd been put in his place. In the service hallway, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, trying to push down the familiar cocktail of anger and shame that rose in his throat. This wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed because of his appearance, his accent, or his job. It wouldn't be the last, but it hurt every single time. "You alright?" Lucas opened his eyes to find Tommy, the pre-med student, looking at him with concern. "Fine," Lucas said automatically. "That lady seemed like a real piece of work," Tommy said quietly. "Maria told me she's done that before. To other servers." Of course she has, Lucas thought. People like Victoria Ashworth didn't develop that level of casual cruelty overnight. It was practiced. Refined. Passed down through generations of privilege that never had to question itself. "It comes with the territory," Lucas said, straightening his vest. "Can't let it get to you." But as he said it, Lucas realized something had shifted inside him. The anger was still there, but it was changing into something else. Something harder and more focused. He thought about the legal clinic, his clinic, and all the people it served. People who'd been dismissed and ignored just like he had been tonight. People who needed someone to fight for them because the world had taught them that their voices didn't matter. He thought about Miguel, the 17-year-old who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. About Rosa, the grandmother fighting to keep custody of her grandchildren after their parents were deported. About James, the veteran who'd been denied benefits because of a paperwork error that nobody would help him fix. All of them invisible to people like Victoria Ashworth. All of them dismissed as not worth noticing, but they were worth noticing. They were worth fighting for, and in 3 hours, Lucas was going to prove it. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Tommy said, interrupting Lucas's thoughts. "In 5 years, I'll be Dr. Tommy Rodriguez, and that lady will still be just some rich woman who peaked in high school." Lucas smiled, his first genuine smile of the night. "Exactly. Never forget that your worth isn't determined by how other people treat you." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Tommy asked. Lucas paused. It was what he told his clients. What he'd learned in therapy. What Professor Chen had taught him during their long conversations about navigating the world as someone who didn't fit neatly into other people's expectations. "Among other things," Lucas said. "I also remind myself that everyone has a story. Everyone's fighting battles that other people can't see. Even her." Tommy looked skeptical. "That lady? What kind of battles could she possibly have?" "I don't know," Lucas admitted. "But I've learned that people who need to put others down usually have something missing in their own lives. Doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains it." "You sound like you've thought about this a lot." "You have no idea," Lucas thought. But before he could respond, Janet's voice came through their earpieces again. "All right, people, it's showtime. Award ceremony starts in 30 minutes. I need everyone on their A game for this. Clean glasses, fresh smiles, and remember, we're professionals." Lucas checked his watch. 8:30 p.m. In 30 minutes, the ceremony would begin. In 45 minutes, his name would be called. In 45 minutes, everything would change. He returned to the ballroom with a fresh tray, moving through the crowd with new purpose. The anger from his encounter with Victoria Ashworth had crystallized into something sharper, determination. As he served drinks and cleared plates, Lucas found himself really seeing the other staff for the first time that night. Maria, working her second job so her kids could stay in their apartment. Tommy, putting himself through pre-med by carrying trays for people who looked right through him. Janet, managing a team of servers while dealing with entitled guests who treated her staff like they were disposable. All of them working. All of them fighting. All of them invisible to the people they served. But not for much longer. The lights began to dim as guests found their seats for the ceremony. Lucas positioned himself near the stage, still carrying his tray, still wearing his name tag, still invisible to everyone around him. At table 7, Victoria Ashworth was holding court again, probably telling another story about her superior taste or her expensive possessions. She caught his eye as he walked past and smirked, clearly satisfied that she'd successfully put the help in his place earlier. She had no idea what was coming. The spotlight hit the stage, and Channel 7 News anchor Rebecca Martinez stepped up to the podium in a sequin gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "welcome to the 15th Annual Metro City Foundation Gala." Lucas set down his tray and moved toward the backstage area, his heart beginning to pound, not with nerves, but with anticipation. "Tonight, we celebrate the individuals and organizations that make our city stronger, more just, and more compassionate." In the wings, Janet was waiting with his suit jacket. "You ready for this?" she asked quietly. Lucas looked out at the ballroom full of people who had spent the evening treating him like he was invisible. At table 7, where Victoria Ashworth was probably getting ready to applaud politely for whatever do-gooder was about to be honored. At Tommy and Maria and all the other servers who were still working, still fighting, still believing that tomorrow could be better than today. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. Rebecca's voice rose with practiced dramatic flair. "We'll begin with our Community Service Awards, followed by our Youth Leadership Recognition, and finally, our highest honor of the evening." Lucas slipped out of his server's vest and into his suit jacket. In the mirror, he watched the transformation happen in real time. Server to professional. Invisible to unmistakable. This year's Outstanding Impact Award goes to someone who represents the very best of what we can accomplish when we refuse to accept that things can't change. The murmur in the crowd was growing louder as people began to sense that something special was happening. From foster care to Harvard Law School. From serving tables to serving justice. He opened a free legal clinic in Metro City's most underserved district, funded entirely through his own determination and an evening catering business. Lucas could hear the confusion building in the ballroom. People were starting to put pieces together, whispers spreading from table to table. In just 6 months, his clinic has helped over 200 families navigate housing disputes, immigration issues, and civil rights violations. At table 7, Victoria Ashworth's champagne glass had stopped halfway to her lips. "Please join me in welcoming this year's Outstanding Impact Award recipient." Lucas stepped toward the stage entrance, ready to claim his place in the light. "Lucas Reyes." The applause started confused, scattered. Then, as understanding dawned, it built into something thunderous. Lucas walked onto that stage like he owned it, because tonight, he did. The spotlight found him, and he found table 7. Victoria Ashworth's mouth had fallen open. Her face had gone pale. Behind her, projected on the massive screen for the entire ballroom to see, was his name in golden letters. Lucas Reyes, Harvard Law School, Class of 2023. Founder, Eastside Legal Aid Clinic. The same Lucas Reyes she'd told to go clean a table. The same Lucas Reyes she'd said didn't belong in the VIP section. The same Lucas Reyes who probably doesn't even speak English properly. As the applause continued to build, Lucas realized that this moment, this exact moment, was why he'd endured every dismissive comment, every moment of being treated as invisible, every night of carrying trays for people who would never see him as their equal. Because sometimes, the best revenge is success. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is prove that everyone, absolutely everyone, has the capacity to surprise you. The woman who told him he was just a waiter was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The thunderous applause seemed to go on forever, but Lucas heard it like he was underwater. Everything had slowed down, crystallized into this single moment where his two worlds, invisible server and Harvard-educated lawyer, collided in front of 300 of the city's most influential people. He reached the podium and waited, his eyes scanning the crowd that had suddenly transformed from dismissive to desperately curious. At table 12, Charles, the man who'd predicted his clinic would close by Christmas, looked like he'd swallowed his wine glass. Near the back, Tommy and Maria were staring at him with expressions of pure shock and dawning pride. But it was table 7 that held his attention. Victoria Ashworth sat frozen, her champagne glass still suspended halfway to her lips, her face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light, confusion, recognition, horror, and something that might have been the first stirring of shame. The applause finally died down, and Lucas found himself face to face with a microphone and 300 people who suddenly wanted to know everything about the waiter who wasn't just a waiter. He could have given the standard acceptance speech. Could have thanked the foundation, mentioned his clinic's work in broad strokes, and walked off stage with his dignity intact and his point made. Instead, Lucas made a choice that would define not just this night, but everything that came after. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system with the same confidence he used when arguing before a judge. 6 hours ago, I walked into this room as catering staff. Some of you saw me. Most of you didn't. Tonight, I want to talk about what it means to be invisible." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. This wasn't the gracious, generic acceptance speech they were expecting. Rebecca Martinez, still standing to the side of the stage, looked like she was calculating whether she should intervene. I grew up in foster care, Lucas continued, settling into the rhythm that had served him well in courtrooms and client meetings. Bounced between 7 different homes until I aged out at 18 with nothing but a backpack, a high school diploma, and a promise to myself that my life would matter. That somehow, someday, I would count for something. The silence in the room was absolute now. You could hear the crystal chandeliers tinkling softly in the air conditioning, the distant clink of glasses being set down as servers stopped mid-motion to listen. I worked 3 jobs to get through college. I cleaned office buildings at night, washed dishes at a diner on weekends, and yes, I served at events exactly like this one. I learned that there are 2 types of people in this world, those who see the humanity in everyone they meet, and those who see only what serves their immediate needs. At table 7, Victoria had set down her glass entirely. Her face had gone pale, and Lucas could see her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "Tonight," Lucas said, his voice growing stronger, "someone told me I was just a waiter and should go clean a table." She wasn't wrong about the first part. I am a waiter. He paused, letting that sink in, watching as people throughout the ballroom began to piece together what had happened earlier. I wait for justice. I wait for the moment when a family facing illegal eviction gets to stay in their home. I wait for the teenager everyone else has given up on to walk across a graduation stage. I wait for the day when a child in foster care realizes that their zip code doesn't determine their destiny. The energy in the room was shifting. Lucas could feel it, conversations that would happen after tonight, perspectives that were being challenged in real time. But I don't wait passively. While I'm waiting, I work. I built my catering company not because I love serving food, but because it gave me the flexibility to go to law school at night and the funds to open a clinic in the community that raised me. Every plate I carried, every glass I filled, every moment of being treated as invisible brought me one step closer to being able to serve justice instead of champagne. Near the front, Lucas spotted Professor Chen, his law school mentor, who must have been invited as one of the academic representatives. The older man was beaming with pride, but there were tears in his eyes. The Eastside Legal Aid Clinic exists because I remember what it feels like to be voiceless. To be dismissed. To be told you don't belong. We've helped over 200 families in 6 months, not because we're special, but because we see people who have been invisible for too long. Now Lucas looked directly at table 7, his gaze finding Victoria Ashworth's eyes and holding them. I want to thank the person who reminded me tonight that I'm just a waiter. Because she's right. I am. I'm waiting for a world where a child's prospects aren't determined by the circumstances of their birth. I'm waiting for a society where dignity isn't a luxury item available only to those who can afford it. And I'm willing to wait as long as it takes, while working every single day to make it happen. He stepped back from the microphone, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then the applause began. But this wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping from earlier. This was something deeper, more complex. People were standing, not just at a few tables, but throughout the ballroom. At table 15, a woman was wiping tears from her eyes. Near the back, Lucas could see Tommy jumping to his feet, his face split by an enormous grin. But it was what happened at table 7 that surprised everyone. Victoria Ashworth stood up, not to applaud. Not to join the standing ovation that was now thundering through the ballroom. She stood up, pushed back her chair, and walked straight toward the stage. The applause faltered as people noticed her movement. Conversation stopped mid-word. Rebecca Martinez stepped forward, clearly unsure whether this was part of the program or a crisis that needed managing. Lucas watched Victoria approach, his mind racing through possibilities. Was she going to confront him publicly? Defend her actions? Make a scene that would overshadow everything he'd just said? She stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then, in a voice that carried clearly through the microphone system, she said, May I say something?" The request hung in the air like a challenge. Lucas glanced at Rebecca, who looked like she wanted to crawl under the podium. The smart move would be to politely decline, to end on the high note of his speech and avoid whatever drama was about to unfold. Instead, Lucas stepped aside and gestured toward the microphone. Victoria climbed the steps to the stage on unsteady legs, her red dress rustling in the absolute silence. When she reached the podium, she gripped it with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She started, then stopped. Swallowed hard. Started again. "My name is Victoria Ashworth, and I owe this man an apology." The words came out shaky, uncertain, nothing like the confident, commanding voice she'd used to dismiss Lucas earlier. An hour ago, I told Lucas that he was just a waiter and didn't belong in the VIP section. I was cruel. I was wrong. And I was. Her voice cracked. I was everything that's wrong with people like me. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. This wasn't just an apology, it was a public confession, a dismantling of the social armor that had protected her for 50 years. I've spent my entire life believing that someone's worth was measured by their position, their bank account, their family name. Tonight, this remarkable man showed me how wrong I was. How blind I've been. How much I've missed by seeing people as functions instead of human beings. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup. Lucas, I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't know if I deserve it. But I want you to know that what you've built, your clinic, your work, your refusal to let people like me make you invisible, it matters. It all matters. She turned to face the audience, her voice growing stronger. And to everyone in this room who has ever treated service staff like they were invisible, who has ever dismissed someone because of their job or their appearance or their accent, shame on us. Shame on all of us. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. More uncomfortable. People were shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact, probably remembering their own moments of casual cruelty. Victoria turned back to Lucas, who had remained silent through her entire speech. I know this doesn't fix what I said. I know words can't undo the hurt I caused. But if you'll let me, I want to do more than apologize. I want to help. I want to learn. I want to be better than I was tonight. She stepped back from the microphone, and for a long moment, Lucas just looked at her. The woman who had humiliated him an hour ago was now standing in front of 300 people, publicly dismantling her own privilege and begging for a chance at redemption. Lucas stepped forward to the microphone. Victoria, he said quietly, can I tell you something? She nodded, tears still flowing. You weren't the first person to treat me like I was invisible tonight. You weren't even the worst. You were just the loudest. His voice was gentle, without malice. But here's what I learned a long time ago. How people treat you says everything about them and nothing about you. He paused, looking out at the crowd before continuing. What happened tonight, both what you said and what you just did, that takes courage. Not many people are willing to examine their own behavior, especially in public. That tells me more about who you really are than what happened at your table. Victoria's shoulders shook with silent sobs. You asked how you can help, Lucas continued. The Eastside Legal Aid Clinic holds community sessions every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We serve coffee, and families come in to talk about their problems. Sometimes they need legal help, sometimes they just need someone to listen. If you're serious about learning, about seeing people differently, you're welcome to come observe. I'll be there, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. Good. And Victoria? Lucas smiled. Bring work clothes. We always need help serving that coffee. The laughter that rippled through the ballroom was warm, relieved, the kind that comes when tension breaks and people remember that redemption is possible. As Victoria walked back to her table, the applause began again. But now it was for both of them, for the man who had refused to let cruelty make him cruel in return, and for the woman who had found the courage to confront her own failures in front of everyone who mattered to her. Lucas left the stage to a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. But as he moved through the crowd toward the exit, something remarkable happened. People didn't just applaud. They approached him. The woman from table 15, Dr. Sarah Kim, according to her name tag, grabbed his arm gently. My hospital needs someone like you on our community outreach board, she said. Would you consider it? A man in his 60s pressed a business card into Lucas's hand. My firm handles pro bono work. We've been looking for the right community partnership. Tommy appeared at his elbow, his server's vest forgotten in his excitement. Dude, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You just changed that lady's entire life. But it was Maria Gonzalez who stopped Lucas in his tracks. Mijo, she said, using the Spanish endearment that meant, my son, I've been working these events for 15 years. I have never seen anything like what just happened. You didn't just win an award tonight. You reminded all of us what dignity looks like. As Lucas finally made it to the exit, he realized that the night had changed him too. The anger he'd carried for so long, at the system, at the people who dismissed him, at the unfairness of it all, had transformed into something more powerful. Purpose. Hope. And the knowledge that change was possible, one conversation at a time. 3 months later, Lucas was reviewing case files at the clinic when Janet Martinez knocked on his door. You have a visitor, she said with a smile that told him everything he needed to know. Victoria Ashworth stepped into his office, but she looked nothing like the woman from the gala. Gone were the designer dress and expensive jewelry. Instead, she wore jeans, a simple sweater, and sneakers that had clearly seen some hard use. Her hands were stained with paint, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I brought the Martinez family's lease agreement," she said, setting a folder on his desk. "I think we found the violations the landlord was trying to hide." In the 3 months since the gala, Victoria had kept her promise. She'd shown up that first Saturday morning nervous and overdressed, clutching a coffee cup like a shield. But she'd stayed. She'd listened. She'd learned. More importantly, she'd acted. She'd used her connections to find pro bono legal support for families who needed it. She'd leveraged her real estate knowledge to help tenants understand their rights. She'd even convinced 3 other wealthy donors to fund an expansion of the clinic's services. But the biggest change was in how she saw the world. "Mrs. Martinez wanted me to give you this," Victoria said, pulling a hand-drawn card from her purse. "It's from her daughter Rosa. She says thank you for helping them keep their apartment." Lucas opened the card to find a crayon drawing of a little girl and her family standing in front of a house with a rainbow overhead. In careful 7-year-old handwriting, it said, "Thank you for not letting us be invisible." "You know what the amazing thing is?" Victoria said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I drive through this neighborhood every day on my way to work. I've been driving through it for 20 years. But I never really saw it until I started working here, and now I see Rosa's family. I see Mrs. Chen who runs the corner store and sends money to her grandchildren in China. I see Marcus who's studying for his GED at night while working 2 jobs. She smiled. I see people. Real people with real stories and real dreams." Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had once told him he didn't belong in the VIP section. The transformation was remarkable, not just in how she looked, but in how she carried herself. There was a lightness to her now, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said. "Of course. That night at the gala, what you said to me, was that really who you were? Or was that who you thought you were supposed to be?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "Honestly, I think it was both," she said finally. "I was raised to believe that there were different types of people, and that my type was somehow more valuable than others. It took me 50 years to realize that the only difference between me and anyone else is luck. The luck of being born into money, into connections, into a world that told me I mattered more than other people." She gestured toward the window, where they could see families walking past on their way to the community center next door. "Working here has taught me that everyone is fighting battles I can't see. Everyone has dreams that matter. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their job or their bank account or the color of their skin." "And how does it feel?" Lucas asked, being seen as just another volunteer instead of Victoria Ashworth of Ashworth Development. Victoria laughed, a sound completely different from the sharp, cutting laugh Lucas remembered from the gala. "It feels like freedom," she said. "Like I finally know who I really am instead of who I was supposed to be." A knock on the door interrupted them. Tommy Rodriguez stuck his head in, wearing scrubs instead of a server's vest. "Hey Lucas, sorry to interrupt. I'm on break from the hospital, and I wanted to drop off those medical forms for the Gonzalez family." He grinned. Dr. Tommy Rodriguez, emergency medicine resident. "Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" Lucas smiled. In the months since the gala, Tommy had become a regular volunteer at the clinic, using his medical training to help families navigate healthcare systems and insurance paperwork. "How's the residency going?" Victoria asked. She'd met Tommy during one of the Saturday sessions and had been instrumental in helping him get connected with scholarship opportunities. "Exhausting and amazing," Tommy replied. "But every time I help someone who couldn't otherwise afford medical care, I remember why I'm doing this. It all goes back to that night at the gala, you know. Seeing Lucas up there, realizing that everyone has the potential to be more than what other people see." After Tommy left, Victoria turned back to Lucas. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" she said. "What's that?" "That night, you could have destroyed me. When you had the microphone, when you had the whole room's attention, you could have called me out by name. You could have humiliated me the way I humiliated you." "Why would I do that?" "Because I deserved it. Because it would have felt good. Because most people would have wanted revenge." Lucas shook his head. "Revenge doesn't change anything. It doesn't help families keep their homes or kids get into college or immigrants navigate the system. It just creates more pain." "But accountability does change things," Victoria said. "What you did giving me the space to hold myself accountable. That changed everything. For me, for everyone who was watching, for people who weren't even there but heard about it later. She was right. The story of what happened at the gala had spread far beyond that ballroom. It had been covered in the local paper, shared on social media, discussed in community centers and coffee shops across the city. Not as a story of confrontation, but as a story of transformation. I got a call yesterday, Victoria continued, from a woman who heard about what happened. She said she'd been treating her housekeeper terribly for years, barely acknowledging her, never asking about her family, complaining about her work to friends like she wasn't even human. She said after hearing our story, she sat down with Maria, that's her housekeeper, and really talked to her for the first time. Found out Maria has a daughter in college studying to be a teacher, a husband who works 3 jobs, dreams of opening her own cleaning business someday. And now they're not employer and employee anymore. They're friends. This woman is helping Maria with the business plan, connecting her with other potential clients, treating her like family instead of staff. Lucas felt that familiar warmth in his chest, the feeling he got every time he saw evidence that change was possible, that one moment of courage could ripple outward in ways you never imagined. You know what the best part is? Victoria said. Maria told her that she'd been invisible for so long, she'd almost started to believe she actually was invisible. But now she feels seen. Really seen. And that's changing how she sees herself. A year later, Lucas stood on the same stage where everything had changed, looking out at a very different kind of audience. The Eastside Community Center was packed with families from the neighborhood, volunteers from across the city, and reporters covering the 1-year anniversary of the legal clinic. But this time, Lucas wasn't alone on the stage. Victoria stood beside him, no longer the woman in the red dress who had dismissed him as just a waiter. She was now the co-director of the Eastside Legal Aid Clinic's Community Outreach Program, having left her position at Ashworth Development to dedicate herself full-time to the work. A year ago, Lucas said to the crowd, I learned that visibility is a choice. We can choose to see people as they are, with all their complexity and dignity and potential, or we can choose to see them only as what they can do for us. He gestured to Victoria. But I also learned that change is possible. That people who seem set in their ways can surprise you. That empathy can be learned, that privilege can be examined, and that the most powerful thing any of us can do is admit when we're wrong and commit to being better. Victoria stepped forward to the microphone. Lucas is being kind, she said. A year ago, I was everything that's wrong with people like me. I was cruel, dismissive, and completely blind to my own privilege. If someone had told me then that I would be standing here now, dedicating my life to fighting for social justice, I would have laughed. She paused, looking out at the crowd, many of whom were families she'd worked with personally over the past year. But Lucas taught me something that night that changed my life: everyone deserves to be seen. Really seen. Not as a function or a service or a stereotype, but as a complete human being with dreams and struggles and dignity. The applause was warm and genuine, not the polite clapping of a charity gala, but the appreciation of a community that had been genuinely served. After the event, as they walked through the neighborhood toward the clinic, Victoria stopped in front of a mural that had been painted on the side of the community center. It showed hands of different colors reaching toward each other, with the words, "Everyone Matters," painted in bold letters across the top. You know what I think about sometimes, she said. What's that? What would have happened if you hadn't been scheduled to receive that award that night? If we'd just had that interaction at my table, and that was it. If I'd never learned who you really were. Lucas considered the question. I think eventually, something else would have happened to open your eyes. Maybe not that night, maybe not that year, but eventually. Good people don't stay blind forever. You think I was a good person then? I think you were a person who had never been challenged to be good. There's a difference. They reached the clinic, where a small crowd was gathered outside. Rosa Martinez, the 7-year-old who had drawn the thank you card, ran up to them with a new drawing, this one showing Lucas and Victoria standing together in front of the clinic. I made this for both of you, she said proudly. Because you helped my family stay together. As Lucas looked at the drawing, he realized that the night at the gala hadn't just changed Victoria's life or even his own life. It had changed the definition of what was possible. It had proven that dignity wasn't negotiable, that everyone's story mattered, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to let other people's limitations become your own. 3 years later, the Eastside Legal Aid Clinic had expanded to 3 locations across the city. Tommy Rodriguez was now Dr. Rodriguez, splitting his time between the emergency room and the clinic's medical advocacy program. Victoria had started a non-profit organization that trained wealthy donors to become effective community partners rather than just check writers. And Lucas? Lucas had been appointed to the city's Social Justice Commission and was being recruited to run for city council. But every Saturday morning, he could still be found at the original clinic, serving coffee and listening to families tell their stories. Because he never wanted to forget what it felt like to be invisible, and he never wanted anyone else to feel that way again. The plaque from that night at the gala sat on his desk, next to his Harvard diploma and dozens of thank you cards from families they'd helped. But what he treasured most was a photo from the clinic's 3rd anniversary celebration. Dozens of volunteers and clients standing together, all of them visible, all of them valued, all of them proof that change was possible. In the photo, Victoria stood next to Maria Gonzalez, who had become the clinic's administrative coordinator after leaving her catering job. Tommy was there with his stethoscope around his neck, next to Rosa Martinez, who was now 10 and talking about becoming a lawyer when she grew up. And in the center stood Lucas, no longer invisible, surrounded by a community that had taught him the most important lesson of all. Everyone is waiting for something. The question is, while we wait, who do we choose to see? He had chosen to see everyone, and in the end, that choice had changed everything.